Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. For me personally, I thought, first of all, you have done a lot of work, like more than 820 papers. So that's quite a lot of work. And the second impression was, I think it's quite new, right? Nobody has done this before.
Well, that's, yeah, the idea is that, yeah, this is really driven by the claim that we're doing something, yeah, novel, yeah. There's a competition out there right now in this field that I'm contributing to, sustainability transitions. They had a conference about 2 months ago. All the biggest names were there in the phase out workshop. There's a competition right now. People are writing papers on this now. People have written papers on this, like in terms of, you know, case study X or case study Y, but no one has done like a really large scale literature review on this topic before. That's an opportunity.
That's why I felt it's kind of new thing. So, great research. Thank you very much for presenting about this today. So now I would like to invite students from the classroom and students online. If you have any questions or comments, please ask by raising your hand and introducing yourself. And who would like to start?
Sure.
Introduce.
Hello, Professor Stranger. My name is Ron.
This is Rom. Yep.
I'm a student at GSAS. So I'm just particularly interested about the subjects that you found out, like most of these phase out discussed about. And I was very impressed that there is no mention to single-use plastics or any problems about plastic industry. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Understand if anything is spoken about.
Great. Yes. Yes. So just everybody to recount this question. This was by a student who's a graduate student here in this school, and he was asking about why didn't we find like more mention of plastics. And I was, to tell the truth, expecting to find more mention of this. I think in our data set, there's about maybe, so some of the results I presented to you today, including the inventory, that shopping list, that was actually based upon the older sample of 620 papers. We've since updated the sample, and we updated the sample by removing search field limitations. Before we did not include any engineering, and we did not include natural sciences, but now we've included everything, every field of science. And because of that, we have a small representation of plastics. There's about, I think, 4 papers, and they're new papers. Yeah, new papers. So we're expecting to find more. I think, why isn't there more? I don't know. I think usually in publications, there's a time lag. Like, for example, people like ourselves included, we're tackling what is currently a hot topic. We write a paper, it takes us a year. We put into peer review. We're going to submit this to one of the nature journals. It's probably going to take at least 6 months. In a year and a half, you're going to get this publication. So there's a time lag always, for example. Yeah. So it is discussed, but not to a large extent.
That was very surprising to me.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yep. Thanks. Great question. Thank you. There's a question, if I can take this, the one online by Khan. Would you like to please talk to us?
Yep. Thank you very much, first of all, for great presentation and interesting research. This is Haisam Khan. I am an alumni of Kyoto University, graduated with an MBA and also got the opportunity to study at GSAS. So my question is basically about your slide related to the COP26 the conference. I read last week, like after the COP, that the phase out clause in the final draft, it caused a lot of heated argument, or you may say maybe drama, when India and China actually wanted it to change to phase down from phase out. And if I'm not wrong, in the later it ended up in an agreement by changing the phase out into phase down. And now, like, I'm just curious to know about your thoughts about this type of approach to soften down the activities or the efforts towards this thing? Like, how do you see it? And realistically, what does sound suitable for most of such emerging and developing nations to rely and switch their energy resources completely from rather cheaper and readily available fossil fuels towards emerging technologies such as renewable, where we have reliability related issues as well, maybe. And yeah, that's I would like to hear your thought about it. And once again, thank you very much for great research presentation.
Thank you, Ken. I'm very happy to hear that you're a graduate of Kyoto University, and thank you for joining us online. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for paying attention to this. So to tell you the truth, I mean, yeah, I was not you know, glued to every sort of minute of the negotiations regarding this clause. However, if I'm not mistaken, this is basically if I'm not mistaken, this is the adopted text proposal. Okay. I really hope that
on this last session on Saturday, sorry to interrupt, they actually changed it to face down.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
well,
according to the, maybe I can share the document with you. I read this in Financial Times.
Financial Times. Okay, sure. So I guess I apologize for not following this more thoroughly. I guess I was thinking that this made it to the final adoption, and I was because I was talking about this with my colleagues, and nobody told me that this was changed to face down. And I did a quick internet search, and I didn't find this either. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yes, face down. That's interesting because basically, in terms of meaning, this means that we can still basically maintain a share. And I think this basically shows you that, you know, like, yeah, it just shows you how politically difficult it is to talk about phase outs. And I think when we talk about these at an international level, I think we have this big problem about the, what is it, common but differentiated responsibilities. So especially the responsibilities of the advanced nations like, you know, America, Australia, Europe, you know, Japan, etc. We have a greater responsibility than other countries. However, unfortunately, we're not phasing out these technologies. America doesn't have a national phase out plan. Australia doesn't, Japan doesn't. And so why would we expect China and India to make efforts when actually these countries are already working very hard to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels? So yeah, this is it's a little bit unfortunate because yes, this just shows how difficult it is for humanity to basically do the most obvious thing to fight climate change. It's just like, if you can just have this vision in your mind of just a person on a treadmill in the gym, running along, sweating, but they're basically eating, like drinking Coca-Cola and eating a hamburger while they're running. I mean, does this make sense? That's basically what we're doing right now. Thanks very much. And by the way, in Japan, we have a Japanese equivalent of phase out. But for some reason, they call it in Japanese fade out. And I don't really, fade out kind of sounds like kind of cool, right? Like, you know, I just imagine like a ice skater or something, you know, that he's finished the performance and he just slides out of the arena. It's kind of cool, kind of dramatic. I don't know why the policymakers talk about fade out in Japanese, but yeah, it just goes, I think it's just another classic thing. People just don't like this word, phase out, I think. We change it. Yeah, great question. And I'm embarrassed that I wasn't aware that this was changed to fade down. And I'm very
no. Yeah, thank you for explanation. Thank you, Professor Dimitris, as well, for arranging this thing.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Great. Yeah, there's a chat. Thank you. Ah, great. You've sent me the document. Yep. So let's have a look at this, Khan. So maybe I can share my screen.
Basically, this is not the actual document, the minutes. I just like randomly came across
Yes,
this news.
That's fine. Yeah.
Last week. Yeah, from Financial.
The last minute it was changed.
The last minute. Yeah.
Exactly. Last minute they changed. Yeah, Professor.
Wow. Yeah, I'm really embarrassed that I didn't catch this, but I just, yeah, but whatever. Yeah, this is still interesting though, but yeah, disappointing. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions, like either on Zoom or on the floor? Thank you. Hello. Yes.
My name is Fyodor. I'm a fourth grade GSI student. So my question is related to the paper that I just read today. It was about tipping points. So maybe you heard this term tipping point. Usually it's used as a kind of like in a negative sense that humanity can turn over some tipping points, and then we have like a runaway climate change and so on. But this paper was writing about tipping points in the sense that there are also tipping points for transitions to like more sustainable future. So like if we reverse this concept of tipping points from negative to positive, maybe we can find some particular policies that can actually accelerate the transition to a sustainable future. And they had two case studies. One was Norway, electric vehicles in Norway. So maybe you heard that in Norway it's already like more than 50% of vehicles are electric.
New sales, yep.
Yeah. And so the paper claims that they could achieve it by having like a cost parity between the cost of like electric vehicles and the petroleum vehicles. So naturally, customers choose to buy electric vehicles because it's cheaper to buy the petroleum ones. So so these authors of this paper, they claim that achieving these kind of having these kind of subsidies towards EV kind of created the tipping point. I heard that you can hear me.
It was just a nice, interesting discussion about how he's read some papers recently, and they're talking about this concept of tipping points. And tipping points is a concept that's usually used in natural sciences, especially climate change, that talks about, like, for example, if we think about Greenland that's rapidly melting because of climate change, there's going to eventually come a point where humans cannot stop this melting anymore. Basically, nature flips from one state to another because we've applied some sort of trigger, a stimuli. And that concept from natural systems is being applied to social systems now. So, for example, when we're trying to transition society from point A to point B, can we achieve this so-called tipping point? And usually this is discussed in relation to, for example, the cost competitiveness of technologies. So I guess in Norway, you mentioned that vehicles are selling extremely well over there. More than 50% of new car sales is battery electrics now. That suggests that a tipping point has occurred, doesn't it? And that's been created by the government, like through subsidies in the beginning. So this is an artificially created tipping point. But I think there's never going to be a single driver for this. There's always going to be multiple drivers. And Norway, there's lots of really interesting reasons for this. A, they don't produce vehicles. So basically, they're not going to make anybody angry if they say we're only going to import battery electric vehicles. They're a very rich country, like China. So they're able just to throw lots of money at these consumer subsidies, a small country. So they could basically put the charging infrastructure in a concentrated area. There's lots of advantages. But if we're thinking about like Japan and like, certain challenges we have with like coal-fired electricity, renewables, nuclear, these challenges we're having, phasing certain things out, what are the tipping points that are needed? Yeah, there are certain things that are missing in Japan, unfortunately. Like we don't really have like the social pressure, like people, demonstrating and going up to the government and saying, stop burning coal. It's a very, very small scale. So that's missing. And so one of the important things in Japan, it seems to be is external pressure now. I've really noticed that Japanese companies and the government seems to be paying attention to international pressure. And I think one of the biggest reasons for the fact that Japan has doubled overnight its CO2 emissions reduction target for midterm for 2030. It's promised to reduce its CO2 emissions by 46% compared to 23%. And that occurred because Biden came into power. And within a month, I think Biden arranged a meeting with the Japanese government and said, hey, you guys have to work harder and increase your ambition. So there's a thing there, but basically triggers occur because of cost usually. And this also, cost is affected by scale. So in the beginning, new technologies are very small scale, they're very expensive. and it's very difficult and painful. But then we have these big investments that are occurring. And right now with battery electric vehicles, we see that this is rapidly a snowball. We see that more and more companies are investing in this. We're getting more models on the market. People know about this. They're buying more of them. So in many countries, we are approaching a tipping point. And renewable energies has passed this in many countries. But Japan is yet to attain these for many of these key transition technologies. Yes, and there are many, many reasons for that I would put down to, we can understand this through the social technical lens. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, Russia is also, I think, probably very locked in to certain, fossil fuel extraction, for example. Yeah, yeah. So there are, and don't worry, this is very normal. Countries like Australia, the same. We're locked into fossil fuel extraction. Great, thanks. And there was a question in the back of the room now, but I'm just checking Zoom. Yeah, no more questions. So there's two students at the back of the room, please. Yep.
And I think I have a very I'm a Japanese and I feel like there's only
Yeah.
and feeling very
Yeah, welcome, please. Yeah, irasai, please. Yeah.
So I have two comments.
Yep.
The first is like about the Japanese people. My friends like driving, and he also likes to drive this gasoline engine car because he likes the sound of the car, or and also he likes this manual transmission car because he
Yeah.
and so the people use that kind of things.
Yeah.
And what kind of policy could be made
Yeah.
to phase out
Sure.
this kind of technologies? This is the first question.
Yeah.
And I feel like very similar thing on euthanasia, like killing something.
Sure.
Without,
Yeah.
making damage.
Euthanasia, yurakushi. Yeah, great. Yeah.
I felt that word, killing.
Unlakushi, sorry. Unlakushi, yeah.
And the second idea is that what is the so your paper is talking about how many papers talking about phase out, and this is what you are organizing this kind of papers. But the first paper, when the first paper is written, I think someone or some idea of this kind of technology is harmful or dangerous. This idea was already created by someone.
Yes, yes.
And what is the structure of story behind the creation of this first phase out?
Yeah.
Is maybe a future topic to be studied.
Yeah.
The time the new innovation comes, and this kind of harmfulness is created in the very beginning of the creation of the innovation. I feel, because like light bulb or leaded gasoline, when these things were created, I think some people thought, oh, this is very hard, or this smells very bad, kind of criticism some people around felt. So when and what is structure first phase out is I'm interested.
Sure. Kazuki, thank you for your question. I'm not sure if people online are still there. If I was you, I probably would have logged off a long time ago because of the sound issues. So just quickly to summarize the question, there were two questions from a Japanese student, Kazuki. First of all, he was just commenting there's not very many Japanese people here, but I'm very happy that there are three of you. Thank you. The first question was about gasoline vehicles and what are some potential approaches and policy approaches to accelerating the phase out of these. And he was mentioning that some people consumers like the traditional gasoline engine because of the noise, the vibrations, the transmission, the manual changing gears. This is very normal in my generation. The second question was about the story about phase out. So I just showed you papers today, but in the first two papers I presented, one was on a coal-fired power station, and the second one was like on this pesticide phase out. This obviously is describing real-world events several years after it's happened. So what's the story behind this? Let's begin with this question here. Unfortunately, this case study part is it's coming. So I can't really answer this, but I can just tell you about what I've read from these two papers. Yeah, it's just basically saying that in the US, it's basically responding to pressure, public pressure. And it's very, not talking about climate change, it's talking about local air pollution. And so the idea was that they would switch to other fossil fuels that would be less polluting. That they're switching to oil, actually, burning oil. We don't do that anymore because burning oil is too expensive. It's a waste. But that was the approach. And then in the pesticides, it was environmental issues. However, there was another reason cited, which was basically resistance. Many pesticides actually, if you use them over and over again, weeds and bugs develop a resistance, like antibiotics. And so it's basically a performance problem. They become less effective. So this was another reason for one of the this phase out of this organochlorine pesticides that was cited. So there were different reasons, yeah. So as I said before in the beginning of my lecture, we have kind of read the abstracts of 125 papers, and we're embarrassed to say we don't really know anything about any of these topics. That's kind of the next step. The idea is that we're going to use this as a basis for then doing detailed policies. So we're going to replace papers in the next study with policies, and we're going to basically create a stratified sample using the results from this paper, because now we know the distribution of discussions of substances versus technology and countries. We'll look for actual real-world policies that fit in with this strata, and then we will build up our empirical knowledge. So this is something for the future. And I've only studied phase-outs of coal and a little bit about gasoline vehicles, so I can address the second question. And yeah, the common approach actually is used by California, and China has imported the approach from California. California has two policy instruments. The first one is one that's very commonly used around the world. It's basically environmental standard. It basically says to the manufacturers that make cars, you are only allowed to emit this much CO2 with this engine. And it's usually by 100 miles, 100 kilometers, it's a certain number of grams of CO2. And what they do is they raise that every few years. And so they raise it so high that it becomes impossible to meet this target with an internal combustion engine. That's the first approach. The second approach is it's much more strict. They say every year you have to produce a certain percentage of zero emission vehicles. That can be a battery electric vehicle, or it can be a fuel cell vehicle, but it has to be zero emission. And you have to produce a minimum percentage. And this is called the ZEV mandate. It's become really famous around the world. And it seems to be the only way of forcing industry to make these changes. So industry gets angry, of course. So then you give them rewards. You say, if you produce more than this, and for example, if we say you have to produce 6% of your vehicles as battery electric this year, if you produce 8%, you can sell those extra 2% as a credit to another company. And actually, some companies that are not producing enough, amazingly, Toyota buys these credits. And Tesla, who produces 100% electric vehicles, is making a lot of money, A, by selling vehicles, B, by selling credits. So this is it mirrors the approach of a cap and trade. We use this approach for power stations. We say you can emit a maximum of this much CO2. That limit lowers every year, eventually get to zero. And then if you reduce more than that, you can sell your excess efforts to another company. It's a standard approach in environmental policy and economics too. So that's the approach. And China has imported this approach too. Who else is doing this approach? The EU is looking at this. The EU is using currently CO2 emission targets. Japan doesn't have this approach, because Japan relies on, as I said before, voluntary, as you know, industry roadmaps. So I think probably Toyota and Honda will probably, Honda is already voluntarily, very kind of them. They've said we're going to stop producing gasoline vehicles in 2030. So problem solved. This is the Japanese style. Toyota hasn't done that yet. Toyota, because they count hybrid. Yeah, so there's a big battle between Toyota and the Japanese government about should hybrid vehicles be permitted as a zero emission vehicle. Clearly, it's not zero emission, is it? Because people can drive on the gasoline. And when you drive on gasoline, the efficiency is very poor. And even if you have a plug-in hybrid, if you drive beyond the range of the battery, many people, gasoline is kind of cheap now. People just don't care and they pay the money and they burn the fossil fuel. So this is creating problems all around the world too. So they're controversial, actually. Great questions. Thank you.
Maybe last question.
Hi, Nunu. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Well, first one is just a comment.
Yeah.
From the presentation, and it's kind of seems like phase outs are environmental and health driven, but policy and economically influenced at the end of the day after listening to what you said.
Right. Yeah.
So just looking at the written papers, I've been wanting to ask this question for a while actually. You talk about phase out policies and usually focuses on a lot of good things about phase out policies.
Yeah.
The question that I want to throw is, what's the bad thing?
Sure. Yeah.
And you mentioned coal. You have a coal factory, you have a coal mine, you have people, you mentioned jobs, economic impacts of it. But what about the plan within the policy of how to make sure that the impact or the footprint left behind by that industry is it taken into account in those policies?
Yeah.
This is something I was always considered.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. So basically, for people online, if you're still there, thank you. There's a question about the negative impacts that are provoked by phase outs. So for example, the easy one to understand is unemployment. If the government commits to phasing out coal-fired power stations, if that coal is coming from domestic coal mines, that means that the coal mines will have to close down because they'll lose their customer. And so what happens to the unemployment that's created? So yes, this is an extremely important concept, and this is captured by the concept of just transition. So when people talk about the energy transition, which people like I do use this word a lot, other people that care about these people that, for example, people that work in coal mines, for some people, they're the enemy. But at the end of the day, they're human beings. They're our fellow human beings. They're just trying to make a living. And some of these people were doing this before we spoke about climate change. And some of these people, there are different reasons why they work in coal mines. So we should still protect them. So we have to make sure that people that are going to lose their jobs, including entire companies, should be supported. And so this concept is discussed a lot. Just transitions. But what I find, I've never really focused on this a lot in my research, but I find that most of the time people focus on this from the perspective of fossil fuel extraction. But what I find in a country like Japan that doesn't have fossil fuels, if we phase out technologies, for example, nuclear, or if we phase out coal-fired power plants, the companies that make these plants, the companies that operate them, the communities that support these industries are going to decline. And we're going to have the same problem of unemployment, just triggered in a different area of the economy. So this is a big problem. It's a big problem, yes. And so the idea is we need measure. That's why phase outs are good, because it's a long-term approach. You keep repeating this. In many countries like Germany, they give compensation packages. They give billions of dollars to these mines and say, retrain your workers, hopefully in a green job. We don't want someone to go from coal extraction to oil extraction. Hopefully they'll go and build wind turbines, for example. But the idea is to retrain them, to give people, this handsome payouts. But yeah, I mean, imagine, I don't know, imagine if somebody said to you that you can't study your PhD at Kyoto University anymore. We're going to give you $50,000 US, but goodbye, don't come back tomorrow. I don't think you'd be happy. You could live, but you've probably lost a part of your identity, of your life, your soul, so phase outs it's messy stuff. So I don't have much experience in understanding this, but I just know that in Japan, my interviews with the companies that make coal-fired power stations, they made it very clear and of other interviews as well, that yeah, there's they're trying to also protect their factory workers, and sudden phase outs, sudden policy changes by government has a big impact on industry. And so it's, yeah, academics, we say that, you know, we should phase out A and B, but in reality, it's very difficult. Yes, so there are negative parts of phase out. We have to assume that every time the government makes a policy that causes a very abrupt transition or change in, you know, society, that we create new problems. And the final comment I'll make actually is the transition to already renewable energy and battery electric vehicles is already starting to make other problems. It's happening, for example, with the extraction of raw resources, right? Lithium, cobalt for batteries, and also wind turbines, solar panels, they all require these new metals that are in limited supply. And a lot of them are produced overseas. They're, you know, they're refined in conditions we don't really know about. So we're creating new problems every time we try and solve something. This message got the world very angry. Did you all hear about the movie? I don't recommend you watch it. Please don't watch it. But Michael Moore, the American director, Planet of the Humans. Okay. Yeah, I think that message, I think, is kind of, it's half true, I think. And people kind of dismiss the entire film. But I think that message, unfortunately, was misunderstood because he was very, I think, I don't agree with the way he framed other issues. Like he made out like people drive battery electric vehicles driven by coal-fired power, which is not the case for most of the world. But anyway, I'll stop talking. Great question.
Okay, I'm sorry, but time is up.
Sure.
We were supposed to finish like 7:45, and it's almost 8 o'clock. So if you have any further questions, could you please contact directly Professor Fletcher after this workshop. So with this, first, let me once again thank you with some applause. Great presentation.
Sure.
And interesting discussion. And, I hope that we can continue this discussion also in the future, in like future events or like personal communication. And in the end, let me thank all of you, all students who joined in the classroom and also online for your active participation. And I also hope to see you all. So thank you again and have a good evening.